Thank you. Our question in the World Cafe was, how do we stay focused on a long-term vision for transformation? I'm paraphrasing. So, in a long-term vision for transformation, while sort of getting like tactical wins and also responding to crises and material needs on the ground. So that's the question we discussed, or we tried to tackle, struggle with 3 different groups. We didn't necessarily get to the last piece that much, which was like, in terms of our role, what would it take for us to stay focused on this vision? And I would say that, just to go very quickly, the groups were very different. But some of the highlights, I suppose, there's a lot of highlights, this is gonna be difficult. So some of the highlights were, there was just a question about like who is asking this question, and what we meant by that was like, if was it like a white male bureaucrat government person is asking this question, they have a different vision for transformation than like those folks who are directly impacted. So who is asking this question at first? To which our response, and collectively our response was, well, we're asking this question as movement people, and what we mean is like we folks from the ground up get to set the vision for transformative justice. We had in one group a robust conversation on like, yo, we just need to do it all, so we can't just think about just doing direct service or just doing policy or just doing XYZ, but we need all of these spaces to actually come together to have a shared vision for transformation. And by all these spaces, I just want to be clear that when we say all these spaces, we still mean directly impacted folks. We don't mean like, you know, everybody wins, because they don't. And well, not everybody wins if we keep status quo. So we also talked about accountability to a larger movement, which by that we mean that in order to stay focused on long-term transformative vision, we need to make sure that everyone is accountable to a larger movement. And as we're asking this question, we're thinking about like what undergirds the current system. What are the things that undergirds the current system? Maybe have a little bit of struggle around that in a really great way, in a principled way. But then have accountability so that we're not just thinking of you know, different organizations or trust as in like it only is a part of like one person, and if you go to philanthropy side, we're like, oh damn, I don't trust you. Y'all know that's real. And instead of thinking about that, if we're a part of like a larger movement and a movement ethos, and we have a clear vision and there's clear accountability, then we could actually say this person who was an organizer or was in movement space in this way is now in this, like placed in this particular condition, and we can make requests and or, depending on how they respond, demands of them in that particular space. So if I move from Rethink to now Andrus, that's not a plug, but if I move from Rethink to Andrus, my like movement folks should be able to call me and say like, okay, this is what you gotta move now that you're in this space. And here are the things that you might get in trouble for, but hey, you took the job, not us, so you gotta do this. That was a plug. So, and then the last one is, we have to imagine a radical agenda outside of current political, I don't know what that says, to be honest. Thank you, yes. So, we have to imagine a radical agenda outside of our current political legislation. And one of the things by we, I mean, I definitely brought this up, so I don't know if this is biased, but, so one of the things I brought up was that, you know, from a poetry standpoint, and then Hassan brought up Nipsey, the marathon continues. So from a poetry standpoint, Nikki Giovanni has a poem where she talks about going to Mars. And she says at one point, NASA is gonna have to go to Black Americans and actually ask us how we survived. And she compares the trip to Mars to the Middle Passage. And she talks about like all of the things that would happen in the small ship with people who you're sure are not on your side. And she said, at some point, not only will you not be able to go home or see home, but you don't even know what direction to turn and look to find out where it might be. And she says at that point, NASA will have to call Black Americans. And I would extrapolate that to say, poor Black and brown oppressed people throughout the world. But NASA will have to call them and say, how did you decide you were human amidst everything telling you you were not? And we're gonna have to like be able to talk through that. And this is where we say, imagine a radical agenda outside our current political legislature, because this is what directly impacted people have done, they're doing, and have done through history, is to imagine, like, you imagine how radical that shit has to be for you to imagine a world in which you're human with everything telling you you're nothing. And you have to actually every day not only imagine it, but live out that reality. And we're saying, in order to stay focused on this long-term transformative vision, we not only have to do that, but we have to make sure there's space to actually do that and then make that real. That's all I got.